We have breaking news. President Biden is about to give remarks on the economy at the Brookings Institution. Let's listen.
You know, I wanted to talk about the economy, and it is a daunting task to talk about the transition we're trying to initiate here. I want to thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Cece, for the introduction and for the leadership you served as chair of my Council of Economic Advisors. It's great to be back in Brookings Institution. I started here 400 years ago as a senator. God, it's hard to believe that's long ago. Oh, I know what I meant anyway. But, and then as vice president, and when I was thinking about running for president, I came here, and now as president. Last month, I spoke to the Economic Club of Washington, D.C. about the pivotal actions we took to rescue the economy from the devastating harm caused by the way, in my view, the pandemic was handled, and how we delivered immediate economic relief to those most in need. We got back to full employment, got inflation back down, managed a soft landing that most people thought was not very much likely to happen. Today, here at Brookings Institution, I'd like to talk about the pivotal actions we've taken to rebuild the economy for the long haul. You know, and how we're at a critical, in my view, moment in the direction of the economy is going to take. Next month, my administration will end and a new administration will begin. Most economists agree the new administration is going to inherit a fairly strong economy, at least at the moment. An economy going through fundamental transformation that's laid out a stronger foundation and a sustainable, broad-based, highly productive growth. And it's my profound hope that the new administration will preserve and build on this progress. Like most great economic developments, this one is neither red nor blue. And America's progress is everyone's progress. After decades of trickle-down economics that primarily benefited those at the very top, we've written a new book that's growing the economy, the middle out and the bottom up, that benefits thus far everyone. And this is going to be the test going forward. Over 16 million new jobs, the most in any single presidential term in American history. The lowest average unemployment rate of any administration in the last 50 years. 20 million applications for new business records. I mean, it's for new business, that is a record, I should say. Stock market hits record highs. I wish I owned a lot of stock. You know, the worst part of all this, I acknowledge at Brookings, for 36 years, I was listed as the poorest man in Congress. What a foolish man. Anyway, 401ks are up. More than $1 trillion in private sector investment in clean energy and advanced manufacturing in just 2 years alone. After decades of sending jobs overseas for the cheapest labor possible, companies are coming back to America, investing in building here and creating jobs here in America, in my view, where they belong. And of course, this economic growth is not without pain. The entire world faced a spike in inflation due to disruptions from the pandemic and Putin's war in Ukraine. We acted quickly to get inflation down with the help of Republicans and Democrats. Inflation came down to pre-pandemic levels. Wages have increased, but still too many working and middle-class families struggle with high prices for housing and groceries and the daily needs of life. At the same time as inflation and interest rates continue to fall, we've entered a new phase of our economic resurgence. With the outcome of this election, we also face an inflection point. Do we continue to grow the economy from the middle out and the bottom up, investing in all of America and Americans, supporting unions and working families, as we have the past 4 years, or do we move backward, in my view, backslide, to an economy that's benefited those at the top while working people in the middle class struggle for a fair share of growth and economic theory that encourage industries and livelihoods to be shipped overseas. And I might add, I'm not anti-corporation. For 36 years, I represented corporate America. My state has more corporations registered in my state than every other state in the union. So I'm mildly accustomed to corporate America. And to see it grow is useful and helpful and necessary. But to make the most of the opportunities ahead of, I want to share key pages from our middle-out, bottom-up economic playbook and lay down what I believe to be a new set of benchmarks to measure against the next 4 years and see whether this theory is more than just a phenomenon. 4 years ago, when I came to office, 3,000 Americans were dying per day from the pandemic that infected and then had a profound effect on our economy. Not only ours, but around the world. Millions of Americans lost their jobs or at risk of losing their homes. Hundreds of thousands of factories and businesses, hundreds of thousands, closed and creating despair in communities. I remember when I was campaigning, they'd say, my dad used to work at that factory. My grandfather works at that factory. It's gone. People lost hope. They lost hope, particularly through the Midwest and other areas of the country. Supply chains was shattered. Prices soared in everything from cars to homes to appliances. The previous administration, quite frankly, had no real plan to get us through one of the toughest periods in our nation's history. In fact, there's an old saying, if the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Over the course of decades, Republican leadership, and I'm not those of you who know anything about me and my career in the Senate, I had as many Republican friends as Democratic friends, for real. I'm not one of these, anyway, I won't get going. But I've never been a big fan of trickle-down economics. It was a hammer that was hammering working people. My dad used to say, my dad was a well-read man who he got accepted to go to Hopkins, but during the war he never got to go. But my dad used to talk about it. He said, Dad, Joey, not a whole lot trickles down on my kitchen table at the end of the month. Slashing taxes for the very wealthy and the biggest corporations, diminishing public investment in infrastructure, in education, in research and development. And keep your eye on it. We're going to find out whether or not what they want to do on each of those areas continue to slash, does it make sense or not. Offshore jobs and factories took off for cheaper labor overseas, destroying unions while imposing costs on those products made in America. And despite the mythical reputation to pay for itself, trickle-down economics deeply worsened our fiscal outlook, in my view. To offset the cost, advocates of trickle-down economics ripped the social safety net by trying to privatize Social Security and Medicare, trying to deny access to affordable health care and prescription drugs, lifting the fortunes of the very wealthy, often meant taking the rights of workers away to unionize and bargain collectively. And by the way, I'm all for the very wealthy. I'm not joking. You can make as much money as you can, good for you. But everybody's got to pay their fair share. And by rewarding short-termism in pursuit of short-term profits, extraordinary high executive pay, instead of making long-term investments in many cases. As a consequence, our infrastructure fell further behind. A flood of cheap imports hollowed out our factory towns. Remember Infrastructure Week? We had Infrastructure Week for 4 years and nothing got built. Well, everybody said when I wanted to have an infrastructure bill that mattered, over $1.3 billion, we'd never get it done. We got it done. Next president has a game plan I laid out, and by the way, he's going to find, since I made a promise I'd invest as much in red states as blue, he's going to have trouble not doing it. He's going to have a lot of red state senators who are opposed to all of it, didn't vote for it, deciding it's very much in their interest to build the facilities that are on this block. Economic opportunity and innovation became more concentrated in few major cities, while the heartland and communities were left behind. Scientific discoveries and inventions developed in America were commercialized in countries like China, bolstering the manufacturing investment and jobs instead of the economy. Even before the pandemic, this economic agenda was clearly failing. Working and middle-class families were being hurt. The pandemic and the economic crisis revealed a failure for everyone to see and to feel. And you know, one of the things that's going on here, they just turned off my, I'm going to go on. I lost the electricity here. But anyway, one of the things we found is that, you know, we invented the computer chip, size of the tip of your little finger, to power everyday lives, from vehicles to advanced weapons, cell phones, everything in between. The United States invented these computer chips, but over time we stopped making them. In the very beginning, we produced 40% of them in the world. Well, they all went overseas almost, virtually all. So when the pandemic hit, we found out how vulnerable America was supply chains abroad got shut down in the Far East because people got sick. The factories making the chips closed. And all of a sudden, everybody started learning about supply chains, a phrase that was probably used more in the last 4 years than the last 40 years. I'm serious. Couldn't get these chips. Prices soared. For example, it takes over 3,000 chips to build an American automobile, 3,000. But when the overseas factories making those chips shut down, the production stopped, and the cost of new cars soared. You know, it didn't have to be that way. And I was determined to change that. I remember looking at my staff and saying, I'm going to South Korea. And they said, you're what? Oh, you think I'm kidding? See, the guy next to you is a brilliant economist. He didn't think I was so brilliant going overseas. But all kidding aside.
You're watching President Biden speaking about the economy at the Brookings Institute. He touted his administration's actions to bring down inflation and invest in infrastructure. The president highlighted the stock market's record highs and the low unemployment rate. He also says too many families are struggling to make ends meet and hopes the next administration will build on his efforts to grow the middle class. ABC's Elizabeth Schulze joins me now for more. Elizabeth, why give this speech and why now?
You know, Diane, this was a staunch defense of his economic record. The president trying to make clear that there has been a lot of progress on the economy, especially making the point to point out that he says he inherited a mess from the Trump administration, really trying to remind people of what the economy looked like 4 years ago and how it has rebounded, as you say, pointing out the recovery in jobs, how unemployment still is near a record low right now, talking about the improvement on inflation. Inflation at about 2.6% is a lot better than it was a couple years ago, but an acknowledgement there, Diane, of the reality that even though that inflation rate has gotten better, we know people are frustrated by higher prices, and that has been one of the lingering realities in the economy that has haunted the Biden administration. But really trying to lay out here that the economy that he took on from former President Trump is now benefiting not just the upper class because of the tax cuts that were passed under that administration, but this middle class message that has been key to his administration, and trying to make the case that that's not necessarily what would happen again under the next Trump administration, but at the same time saying, look, President-elect Trump, he's inheriting an economy that looks pretty good. So this is a time for clearly the president trying to reflect on his legacy, show the accomplishments that he's had, while also trying to convince a public that is very skeptical on the economy, as we saw in the election, Diane.
Elizabeth, we also heard him touting the infrastructure bill. What's the impact there? What's the legacy in general that Biden is now leaving behind? And what more can we expect from a new administration?
You know, we have seen the dollars start to flow from those major pieces of legislation like that bipartisan infrastructure law and also Chips and Sciences Act. Those are really some of the key domestic policies that President Biden passed through Congress. But one of the trouble with that, Diane, is those take a long time for people to really see the impact. And the president trying to convince people it's coming, it's better, but maybe not something that people see in their day-to-day lives quite yet.
All right, Elizabeth Schulze, thank you.
Thanks.